Don Carpenter on News Talk 1270 KIML.
News Talk 1270 KIML. Don Carpenter Show. Welcome back to the program. It's 9:07, and I'm pleased to be joined in studio by Secretary of State candidate Pete Illoway. Good morning.
Don, good morning, and thanks so much for having me.
Okay, let me make sure I have the right mic on here. Let's see.
Okay.
Is it this one?
This one?
Okay, I had it right. I just didn't have it turned up a little. Didn't have it turned up enough. Those mics are very sensitive.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a beautiful morning in Gillette, and
Absolutely.
It's a pleasure to be out here.
Thank you, and it's going to be actually fairly warm today. Yesterday was we were talking a little bit off air. It was a little chilly yesterday. I mean, you came up over Powder River Pass, and it was actually snowing. Which now I moved out here from back east, so I'm used to snow. I mean, we actually got a lot more snow where I came from than this, but I'm not used to it snowing in June.
Well, it was all white on top of Powder River Pass yesterday. Wasn't sticking on the highway, but it was snowing and very white.
Well, it's not a bad thing to look at as long as it doesn't stick to the road.
That's right.
So welcome to the program. So why don't we talk a little bit about your background first, and then we'll talk more about your about the issues that you're interested in and what you plan to do with the Secretary of State position. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, Don, I graduated from college in 1963 and came to Cheyenne. I graduated with a degree in Farm and Ranch Management Economics. Came to Cheyenne and worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture for several years, and worked in the statistician's office and sent out questionnaires on numbers of cattle and so forth. And then moved over to the Wyoming Department of Agriculture and drove nearly every road that was paved in the state because I was in charge of the highway weed spraying program. And also at that time, there were 13 weed and pest control districts in the state. So got around, tried to get some more counties involved in weed and pest control, and eventually all counties now have weed and pest control districts. After the Department of Agriculture, moved over to a company called Wycon Chemical Company, which is now called Dyno Nobel. They make nitrogen fertilizers in Cheyenne and explosives. And people up here and Campbell County certainly know about Dyno Nobel because there's a lot of ammonium nitrate that is shipped up here for the coal mines.
So you have a mixture of public and private sector experience then?
Well, I do. And then after about 21 years with Coastal Chem, which is there have been several name changes, I retired. And I'd also done some lobbying for the company in both Nevada and with the Wyoming legislature. So I had a little inkling about the legislature, but decided I'd go to work for the local economic development group in Cheyenne Leads, and worked for them for 2 or 3 years, and then ran for the legislature. Ran in 98, was elected in 99, and then served 14 years in the legislature. And just retired 2 years ago. Did not run. I didn't think it was a career move to continue to run. And 7 of those years, I was chairman of the corporation's elections and political subdivisions, which the Secretary of State's office really appears before.
Well, now I've been down to Cheyenne and I've seen how the lobbying works. I mean, it's actually guys standing out in the lobby. I mean, so you've been on both sides of that door.
I've been on both sides of the door. I've been in private industry. I've been with the feds. I've been with the state. So, my theme for this campaign, experience matters. And I think I've had a really good cross-section of some of these things. So that's why I've got that theme, experience matters.
Well, it certainly does sound like a good varied body of experience. So for those that aren't familiar, and I'm sure we've explained it on the show before, but for those that aren't familiar with the office of Secretary of State, what exactly is the Secretary of State responsible for in this state?
It's a varied office. First of all, if you look at the Constitution, Secretary of State becomes acting governor if the governor is out of state. He's not lieutenant governor. He doesn't become governor. He's the acting governor if the governor is out of state. Also, Secretary of State sits on 3 boards, and we'll talk about them in a minute. But the office is really a business office. Business entities, corporations, LLCs, all register their businesses with the Secretary of State's office. Secretary of State also is the chief elections officer. So all the elections throughout the state are overseen by the Secretary of State's office. Also, there's a securities division, and all stockbrokers that work within the state or do something in the state, 80,000 of them, are registered by that particular division. Then there's the administration division. They handle about 12,000 notaries public. And then there's the technology division. Secretary of State also sits on the State Loan and Investment Board. He sits on the Board of Land Commissioners, State Canvassing Board, and the State Building Commission. So it's a very busy area. And Secretary of State really, the office pretty well runs with those about 30 people. And then the Secretary of State also sits on those boards. So it's a busy area.
So and it's interesting that you mentioned the lieutenant governor part at the beginning, because most states have a lieutenant governor that's the second in a executive command, but this is a much more wide variety of duties. I mean, there's something there's a little bit of everything. It's like a hodgepodge of duties. Absolutely, and some people have termed it a lieutenant governor. He's not. Secretary of State Kathy Carpenter tried to run for governor from the office. That didn't fit. This is really not a jumping off spot. The only person in the last 50 years that was Secretary of State became governor was Jack Gage. So it's not a spot to jump from. It is an office that is absolutely vital to the state of Wyoming in the things that it does. I mean, all of the bills, all of the documents, all of the resolutions, all are filed with the Secretary of State. So not only is it a business office, but it's a repository of all those pieces of paper that pass through the state. So now, while it is an elected office, would you say that it's more of a business office than a politician's office?
Absolutely.
Okay, that definitely makes sense. Actually, we're up against our first break, so why don't we take that real quick, and we'll come back and talk about some of the things that you'd like to do as Secretary of State. And of course, the phone lines will be open the entire time. If you have any questions, you can give us a call. But we'll be right back. News Talk 1270 KIML.
Listen every Friday at 9 a.m. for Steve's Store, or visit thenewbasinsradio.com for the latest listings. Don Carpenter on News Talk 1270 KIML. Call Don now, 682-1270. News Talk 1270 KIML.
News Talk 1270 KIML. Don Carpenter Show. Welcome back to the program, and we're having a chat with Pete Illoway. He's a Secretary of State candidate, and we talked a little bit about the office and a little bit about your background, but I kind of want to backtrack and maybe talk about some of the other things that you've done down in Cheyenne, and some of the things that you've. I mean, I have your biography and your resume here, and there's a lot to it. Don, there's definitely a lot to it.
Well, Don, thanks. I've lived in Cheyenne really almost since I got out of college. Had a ranch in eastern Laramie County, a small place. But currently I sit on the Business Council Board of Directors, and I think a lot of people understand about the Business Council. I'm also on the Cheyenne Airport Board, and I've lobbied for actually, one of my clients is the Wyoming Airport Operators Association. I also am on the Board of Advisors for First Interstate Bank in Cheyenne, and serve on a number of other boards. And as I said, I worked for Cheyenne Leads for a number of years, so I've advocated and continue to advocate for economic development throughout the state.
Well, and as you mentioned in the last break, for the Secretary of State office, which is primarily a business office, I imagine that experience with the Business Council would translate well to that.
It certainly does, and of course, those items or those projects that go before the Business Council all end up in front of the SLIB board, the State Loan and Investment Board, and the Secretary of State sits on that board and makes those decisions because they're the ultimate decider of who gets money and where it goes and so forth. So yes, it's a wonderful way to transition and talk about Secretary of State.
Well, and I also imagine that working with airport issues, and we talked a little bit about this off the air. We spent on the show last week. We spent a good amount of time talking about the air enhancement. So on the state level, and we've talked about the county and the city level. On the state level, I mean, what can we do to to make this a little bit easier to digest?
Well, Don, you're not the only one to ask this question. I'm not sure that the Secretary of State could do anything, but if I'm elected, I want to try and get the 5 electeds together and sit down and talk about air service. We talk a lot about economic development. Economic development follows air service, makes economic development work or help or whatever you want to say. So I don't know whether the 5 electeds can do anything, but I'd certainly like to sit down and try to, so to speak, noodle together and see if there's anything that can be done. We have a problem in Wyoming. We're a small population, and trying to get air service is very difficult.
Well, yeah, and I don't think it's an easy solution, but again, like you mentioned, maybe a brainstorming session. You might not have any ability to enact any kind of legislation or anything, but maybe could come up with some ideas that the legislature could use in the future.
We can certainly sit down with aeronautics and talk about it and the Business Council and see if there's anybody we can go talk to. Sometimes you elevate it a little bit. With the governor or secretary of state, you elevate it and you go talk to a company. Maybe that helps. Don't know. It's worth a try.
It certainly doesn't hurt, and you get paid a salary. You're not paid by the hour, so
that's correct.
It's not like having a lawyer try to figure things out for you. So it certainly doesn't hurt to try. So now that we've kind of talked a little bit about your background and about the position, saying you are elected Secretary of State, I mean, what are going to be your goals as Secretary of State?
One of my goals, Don, and thanks for asking the question, one of my goals is to try to tell young people why it's important to vote and take a program along with the county clerks in every county, is go to the high schools, go to the junior colleges, and talk about why it's important to vote. Young people don't vote as much. Seniors do. The middle-aged folks do. They know how important it is. The young people don't. There's other things that are going on in that office, and it takes money. A lot of people think you can just go ahead and say, we're going to do this with the business division and put everything on and computerize it. You got to get money from the legislature. You got to get approval to do it. You just don't automatically do things. Now, I agree that the business division should be, Max has worked very hard at trying to move the office forward, but again, it takes money. All the business records and everything should be computerized, business filings and so forth. The legislature gave the Secretary of State's office a program that said all rules and regulations that agencies have should be computerized. That's a huge program. At one time, somebody said 15,000 rules and regulations that needed to be computerized. Whether that's a good figure or not, I don't know, but there's a lot. And so that's a program right now that's ongoing. Agencies are going through their rules and regulations. But Secretary of State is trying to get that program written so that all those rules and regulations can be put on computers. The other thing that's interesting, and nobody has really mentioned, after this next legislative session, everybody vacates the Capitol building, because that's when the renovation of the Capitol building and a portion of the Hirschler building is to be started. So that's a huge planning process just in itself to go ahead and do. Other things, the notary's public law has not been revised for some time. That needs to be taken care of. And there's other programs that are, so to speak, in the works for that office. Again, legislature has to approve some things, and money has to be appropriated because all of it costs money.
Now, and several of the things you mentioned, the legislature would have to sign off on. Obviously, anything that requires money and a new notary's public law as well. Do you feel that your experience in the legislature would be able to help you get that done a little bit easier?
Well, Don, yes, because I do understand the process. The process works, and having served 14 years in the legislature, 7 years as chairman of corporations, yes, I do understand that process, and I still know a lot of those legislators, and I do understand how to work with those folks. They're all friends, and I've seen a lot of them this summer. Some are retiring, some are running for re-election. But you're absolutely correct. The process works, and you need to know how it works.
Well, yeah, and then that is one thing that kind of struck me. I mean, I did a remote broadcast during the budget session. Is that everybody? It's very personal. I mean, the relationships are very personal. I mean, from what I saw on both sides of the aisle. I mean, everybody seems to they seem to know each other, and everybody kind of gets along. There's none of the ugly stuff you see in Washington. So you think that your experience and knowing everybody would actually be a benefit to the position?
Don, experience matters, and I understand pretty well how the Secretary of State's office runs. There are 31 total people in that office. Their budget for a biennium, that's 2 years, is $7 million. They bring in fees and so forth about $35 million. It's a busy office. Those people know what they're doing. You're just not going to go in and say, well, I'm going to get rid of 10% or whatever of those people. That's a small office with huge responsibilities and does a great job.
Well, and 30 people to run the business aspect of an entire state doesn't seem like a whole lot.
And I agree with you. So
even a small population state like Wyoming, it's not a lot of people.
It is not a lot of people, and those people have been there. They understand how to make it work. The Secretary of State really is very, very busy on the SLIB board and on the Board of Land Commissioners. So you've really got two places. You need that administrative assistant or assistant to take care of that office and to run that office and to do the SLIB board. I guarantee you the SLIB board is busy all the time.
Okay, and we're actually up against our bottom of the hour break, so why don't we take that, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about some of these issues, and also, of course, as always, the lines are open, so we'll take your calls as well in the final half hour of the show. News Talk 1270 KIML.
The #1 talk show in Northeast Wyoming. Don Carpenter on News Talk 1270 KIML. You're listening to Don Carpenter on News Talk 1270 KIML. Call Don right now, 682-1270.
News Talk 1270 KIML. Don Carpenter Show. Welcome back to the program. It's 9:38, and if you're just joining us, we're having a little chat with Pete Illoway, candidate for Secretary of State, and we spent the last half hour talking about the office and your experience and how that translates to the office. Now, this isn't really a political position. I mean, it is an elected position, but it's not really a political position. So, I mean, it would be kind of silly to ask questions what you would do about Common Core or something like that. There's really nothing you can, that has nothing to do with your office. But one issue that's really come up over the past week is the state's battle with the EPA. And I've heard from Senator Brasso already about this. The governor has issued his statements. Is there anything that the Office of State Secretary of State could actually do to help this constant battle against the EPA?
Well, Don, thanks. First of all, let me make one comment. I'm not an attorney. The other three are that are running for Secretary of State. Second of all, I'm not seeking another office. I'm not seeking, after this first term of 4 years, I'm not seeking to run for governor ever.
Okay, so we can hold you to that. You're not going to run for governor.
I am not going to run for governor ever. So you could hold me to that. Now, as far as your question about EPA and the other federal lawsuits, the governor and the governor's office, along with the attorney general, has filed lawsuits. There may be 23 some lawsuits, EPA and about the Clean Air Act and about all kinds of things that are going on. I want to support the governor. I'm very optimistic about where the state is going. I want to see us to be civil. I want us to sit there and work together. I want the state to grow. But per se, the Secretary of State would not have anything to do with that lawsuit. That's the Secretary plus the other elected officials should be in 100% of support with the governor in his efforts against the overreach and heavy-handedness of the federal government. They've gotten way out of whack.
Well, and the one thing I will say is, for the most part, I mean, there are a few exceptions, but for the most part, the legislature and the other elected officials seem to be on the same page when it comes to that. Both sides of the aisle as well. There are a few exceptions, but not many.
Well, absolutely true. But I want to make it very clear that as one of the 5 elected officials, I think it's important that we are civil and clear and concise about where we want to move the state. And the EPA is, in their heavy-handedness, it will affect the state. We'll talk about coal plants throughout the United States that are going to shut down or back off or go to natural gas. Of course, natural gas is great for the state of Wyoming, but coal makes a big difference. We've already lost 40 or 60,000 tons of a million tons of production and shipments, and that really affects the state and how money is distributed to the communities, how money is distributed for all the infrastructure projects. So I want to support the governor in those projects when he is working to support for the state and against the federal government.
So you'd say that it's important for the 5 elected officials to show a unified front.
Absolutely.
Because I guess when somebody in Washington, say some guy that works at the EPA, looks online and sees a Huffington Post story with backbiting out here, it makes us look weak.
Absolutely. I think the 5 elected officials absolutely need to be unified in helping the state move forward. And if it's against the EPA or the federal government or whatever, I think we ought to be unified to do that.
Okay, well, and I guess this gets to the part of the interview where I think it would probably be a good time to ask you, how do you differ from the other candidates as far as the 3 running for Secretary of State? I mean, what would you say is the main difference between you and your? You know, you don't have to name names or anything,
sure.
but unless you want to.
No, we'll leave the names alone. First.
But what would you say is the difference?
Well, there's 4 filed.
4, okay.
4 have filed, and then there's a Constitution Party, and that Constitution Party doesn't come into effect, so there's really 5, but that party doesn't come into effect until after the primary.
Right.
So the 4 people that are running, the 4 Republicans that are running against each other, all 3 are attorneys. I'm not.
Okay.
The second thing is, you might say probably at least 1, maybe a couple are running for governor after Secretary of State. As I said, Secretary of State's office is not a jumping spot for governor. It is a business office. It needs to be a business office. That Secretary of State does not need to sit there and be running for governor for the next 4 years. So those are the basic differences. The real big difference is my experience matters. And you can see from that resume and bio that I've had pretty extensive experience from the time that I left college until now, whether it's lobbying or working for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Wyoming Department of Agriculture, private industry, economic development, and the 14 years in the legislature.
So I guess the you'd say the main difference is that you're more business oriented instead of having a background as an attorney.
Absolutely, thank you.
And you know, nothing. I don't want to get sued, so there's nothing wrong. nothing wrong with attorneys, but it is a different skill set.
Some of my best friends are attorneys, and I've used attorneys, and there are some of my best friends. I had a wonderful staff attorney when I was in the legislature. I have nothing against attorneys. I'm just making the comment. I'm not an attorney, and I don't think you need to be an attorney to be Secretary of State. Now,
again, you're not ever going to run for governor. Would you say that the governor's position would be more suited for an attorney, right?
Well, we've certainly had attorneys as governors. Jim Geringer was the last governor that was not an attorney.
It's not a prerequisite, but at least it's a skill set that kind of fits the position.
It's a skill set that certainly helps. But Jim Geringer, who's a good friend of mine, actually lives in my House district in Cheyenne, is not an attorney. But you had Dave Friedenthal, Mike Sullivan, the present governor, Matt Mead. Yeah.
Okay, so but I guess the main distinction to make here is that the Secretary of State position is something it's a little bit different, and so I guess the next question is that now you mentioned 4 years. Is there a term limit on Secretary of State?
There are no term limits in the state. Legislature got rid of term limits when I was in the legislature. I tried to do something about the 5 elected officials. Did not get that done. Max Maxfield, who is the present Secretary of State, who chose not to run for re-election, sued himself because he's chief elections officer, so he had to sue himself, got rid of term limits. So there are no term limits. So the 5 elected officials, their terms are 4 years at a time.
So now is this a thing that you're looking at it might be more than one term, or are you just going to take it one at a time?
I'm going to take one step at a time, and the first step is to win the first 4 years. Have no idea what carries on after that.
Well, okay, and I imagine it also I guess it would depend on how you like the job once you get there.
That's correct. It's a 4-year job. It's more than an 8-hour job because the secretary does travel throughout the state, especially on taking a look at SLIB projects, state loan and investment projects, talking to people that lease grazing land, taking a look at the various state institutions throughout the state. So it's not just sit in your office in Cheyenne and not get around the state and talk to people. It's a busy office.
And we only have a couple minutes left before we have to wrap things up. If you had to summarize summarize why you're the best candidate in say 2 minutes, how would you do that?
Well, I'd go back, Don, and just say experience matters. My 14 years in the legislature, plus my private experience, private business experience, plus just knowing how the state operates, how the state works with the legislature. The state legislature makes policy, and the Secretary of State follows through and makes that happen. And if he wants additional policy, he goes back to the legislature and talks to them. I know how to do that. Been there, done that. So that's why I think I'm the best of the other people running.
And if anybody's interested in checking out, your experience, your resume,
Right.
your resume is available, I believe, on your website, right?
The website is www.PeteIlloway, PeteIlloway.com.
Okay, PeteIlloway.com. And you have a phone number that anybody can contact you at?
There's on this, it's 307-514-3785, or you can email me at pete@PeteIlloway.com.
Okay, well, thank you very much for stopping by and having a chat with us. Glad you could spend the entire hour with us. It's been very enlightening. I learned a lot about the position. It's definitely something. You're a Pennsylvania guy. You grew up in Pennsylvania, so many
years ago.
Yeah, well, it's been a while for me too. But we're almost from the same part of the country. But you've been here for how long? Since let's see.
Well, I went to college in 1959, graduated in '63, and came to Wyoming as fast as I could.
Well, so you've been here. You've been here for quite a while.
Yep.
I want to thank you for stopping by again, and hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to you again sometime soon.
Thank you, Don. Appreciate it.
Thank you. That's Pete Illoway, Secretary of State candidate. PeteIlloway.com is the website. I'm going to take a break. We'll come back and wrap the show up. News Talk 1270 KIML.
Listen every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for the Tuesday Morning Quarterbacks. Don Carpenter on News Talk 1270 KIML. 70 KIML. 70 KIML. 70 KIML.